Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to unpack a really specific viewpoint on U.S. foreign policy when it comes to Iran. Now, everything we're about to talk about comes directly from a commentary by Victor Davis Hanson, and he basically frames this whole thing as a choice between two totally different strategies.
And right off the bat, you can see the source material does not pull any punches. It frames the U.S.-Iran relationship as this long, drawn-out conflict. We're talking nearly 5 decades here. So this quote, it really sets the stage perfectly for what the commentator sees as the real question. It's not about if the U.S. should do something, but what it should do. What's the strategy?
Okay, so let's get into it. Here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at the big debate at the center of all this. Then, we'll dive into the two competing strategies. You've got the diplomatic approach on one side and the maximum pressure approach on the other. After that, we'll touch on a pretty interesting rebuttal to a domestic political charge, and then we'll wrap up with the specific path forward that the author suggests.
So, at the very core of this whole analysis is this one big idea, that U.S. policy towards Iran, and more importantly, the results of that policy, can be split right down the middle depending on who's in the White House. And that, in turn, creates this really sharp contrast in how Iran decides to act.
And yeah, this is really the main argument of the whole piece. The idea is that nothing Iran does is random. Whether they're hijacking ships or, speeding up their nuclear program, it's all seen as a direct reaction to the kind of signals and policies coming out of Washington, D.C.
All right, so let's dig into that idea a little more. We'll start with the first approach, the diplomatic one. According to the source material, this is the strategy you see mostly from Democratic administrations.
So the commentary lays out what it calls a really clear pattern here. Back in the Obama era, you had sanctions being lifted, frozen assets being returned, all part of that big Iran nuclear deal. But the author argues that the deal didn't really solve anything. It just kind of kicked the can down the road. Then fast forward to the Biden administration, and the source points out that things like the Houthi terrorist designation were taken off the table.
And so, what were the consequences? Well, according to this analysis, all those diplomatic moves led directly to a more emboldened Iran. An Iran that felt like it could get away with hijacking ships, taking hostages, and, this is a big one, pushing its nuclear enrichment all the way up to 60%.
The source really zeroes in on this one moment, a $400 million transfer of unfrozen assets that was reportedly shipped at night. The commentary uses this as a really powerful symbol of the whole policy, suggesting that it was something the administration knew didn't look good, so they did it quietly.
Okay, so that's one side of the argument. Now let's flip it and look at the other approach, the maximum pressure campaign, which the commentary links directly to the Trump administration.
And the timeline here is pretty much the exact opposite. It's all about escalating confrontation. It starts with pulling out of the nuclear deal, then ramps up with this campaign of just crippling economic sanctions, and it all leads to that major event, the drone strike that killed the top Iranian general, Qasem Soleimani.
So what was the result of this strategy? According to the source, it was the total opposite. Iran, to put it simply, behaved. And the reason why, the commentary argues, was just one thing: fear. Pure fear of what it calls an unpredictable U.S. president. And that fear supposedly was enough to stop them in their tracks.
So here you have it, laid out side by side. On the one hand, a diplomatic approach that, according to the source, leads to an emboldened Iran. On the other, a maximum pressure approach that supposedly leads to a contained Iran. The commentary presents these as two completely separate paths, and, well, you couldn't get more different outcomes.
Okay, and right here, the analysis takes a really sharp turn. It actually pivots away from foreign policy for a moment and wades into domestic politics. Why? To push back against a specific accusation often made against Donald Trump, the person behind that maximum pressure policy.
The author takes direct aim at one word in particular: fascism. The argument made is that people who throw that label at Trump don't really define what they mean, and more importantly, they don't see the irony in their own actions, at least according to this source.
And this is where the rhetorical strategy gets really interesting. To counter that fascism claim, the source lays out this kind of checklist. It asks, did Trump cancel an election? Did he use the government to go after his main rival? Did he try to get his opponent kicked off the ballot? The source asks if he did these things, with the very clear implication being that his opponents actually did.
And to build on that point, the commentary brings up the two impeachments. It basically frames them as entirely political moves, even pointing to what it calls coordination between people like Adam Schiff and various whistleblowers to manufacture a case.
So, okay, after looking at the past and pushing back on some of those domestic political arguments, where does that leave us?
What's the proposed path forward? Well, the source lays out a very specific, and I'd say very aggressive, endgame.
But first, to really get the proposed solution, you have to understand how the source defines the problem itself. The Iranian regime isn't seen as a normal, legitimate government. It's described as an aberration, something that hijacked a great culture, has no popular support, and is hated by pretty much everyone in the region. It's even called a useful idiot for countries like Russia and China. And framing the regime this way is absolutely key to understanding the solution that's about to be proposed.
And here's that solution. It's a three-step plan designed to re-establish deterrence. Step 1, send a clear, unambiguous warning. Step 2, if they don't listen, hit something strategic, like a single bridge or a power plant, without any warning. The idea isn't a massive attack, but to show you can and you will. And step 3, just keep doing it until they get the message. Until there's a crystal clear link in their minds between their aggressive actions and our painful response.
And the end goal here isn't just to get them to back off for a little while. No, the source argues the ultimate goal is to completely cripple the regime's ability to cause trouble. The hope or the belief is that enough pressure from the outside will cause the whole thing to collapse from the inside. They're talking about a Berlin Wall moment, something that would totally change the game in the Middle East.
So at the end of the day, this commentary leaves us with two completely different paths forward. And it boils down to one huge question. The way this analysis frames it, the choice between diplomacy and deterrence, well, it's not just another political squabble. It's a decision that could very well decide the future of one of the most volatile and important regions in the entire world.